"Sir, are you okay?" The street cleaner lifted his head slowly. His hands were shaking. "I haven't eaten since yesterday," he said quietly. "I just need a little water." Maya froze. She looked back at her small apartment building, then at the bottle in her hand. It was the last one she had for the day. She stepped forward anyway. "Please," she said softly, pressing it into his hands. "Take it." The man stared at her like no one had ever done that for him before. She had no idea that the man she just helped wasn't a street cleaner at all, and that this single act of kindness would put her on a path she could never turn back from. King Marcus stood at the tall glass window of his palace study, watching the city of Charleston spread out below him like a living map. The morning sun painted the buildings gold, but his heart carried a weight that no amount of beauty could lift. His only son, Prince Daniel, was 30 years old now. Tall, educated, kind-hearted, a son any father would be proud of. But there was one thing missing, a wife. It wasn't that women didn't want Daniel. The problem was that too many wanted him for reasons that had nothing to do with who he really was. They saw the palace. They saw the expensive cars. They saw the crown and the influence and the wealth that could change their lives overnight. But they didn't see Daniel. The man? They didn't see the soul behind the title. King Marcus remembered his own late wife, Queen Isabella, who had passed away 5 years ago after a long battle with illness. She had loved him back when he was just a community organizer in the poorest parts of Charleston, long before his uncle died without an heir and left him the throne. Isabella had loved him when he wore thrift store jackets and carried protest signs under his arm. She had loved the man, not the crown that came later. On the night before she died, lying in that hospital bed with tubes and machines around her, Isabella had held his hand with what little strength she had left. Her voice was weak, but her words were strong. "Marcus," she had whispered, "promise me something important. When Daniel is ready to marry, don't let him choose a woman who loves the throne more than the man. Find him someone with a pure heart, someone who would love him even if he had nothing. That's the only kind of love that will last." Those words had lived in King Marcus's mind every single day since her death. He watched his son meet woman after woman, daughters of senators, fashion models, television personalities, businesswomen with designer clothes and perfect smiles. All of them arrived at the palace with their hair styled perfectly and their jewelry sparkling under the chandeliers. All of them asked questions about the royal budget before they asked about Daniel's dreams. Daniel was polite to all of them. He had been raised to be respectful. But King Marcus saw the emptiness in his son's eyes after each meeting. He saw how Daniel would retreat to his room and sit alone, staring out at the city, searching for something real in a world that felt increasingly fake. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of purple and orange, King Marcus sat with his son in the palace library. The room smelled of old books and leather. It was their favorite place to talk, away from the guards and servants and the endless formality of royal life. "Daniel," the king said slowly, setting down the book he'd been pretending to read, "can I ask you something honest?" Daniel looked up from his own book. "Of course, father. Always. Are you tired of this? The parade of women who come here pretending to care about you." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he closed his book and let out a heavy sigh. "Yes, father, I'm exhausted by it." Sometimes I wish I could just walk through the city as a normal person, meet someone who doesn't know my name or my title, someone who would talk to me because they want to, not because I'm a prince." King Marcus nodded slowly. An idea had been forming in his mind for weeks now, and hearing his son's words made it feel more right than ever. "What if we could make that happen?" the king asked quietly. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" King Marcus leaned forward, his eyes serious, but filled with a strange kind of excitement. "What if I went out into the city, not as a king, but as an ordinary man? What if I dressed as someone people look down on, someone they ignore or treat poorly? A street cleaner, perhaps? A garbage collector? Someone invisible?" Daniel stared at his father like he'd just suggested flying to the moon. "You want to disguise yourself as a poor worker?" "Yes," King Marcus said firmly. "Your mother once told me that you can see a person's true character by how they treat someone who can do absolutely nothing for them. If I go out there as a street cleaner, someone people think is beneath them, I will see who has a real heart and who doesn't. And when I find a woman with true kindness, with genuine compassion, I'll bring her here for you to meet." Daniel was silent. Part of him thought the idea was completely crazy, but another part of him, the part that was bone-tired of fake conversations and empty smiles, felt a small spark of hope for the first time in months. "Father," he said carefully, "if you're going to do this, please promise me you'll be safe. The streets can be dangerous." King Marcus smiled and reached across to squeeze his son's shoulder. "I'll be careful, but I must do this for you, for your future, for the memory of your mother and the promise I made to her." That night, King Marcus lay awake in his royal bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what he was about to do. It was risky. It was unconventional. Kings didn't dress as street cleaners and walk among their people in disguise. But it felt necessary. It felt like the only way to find what his son truly needed. The next morning, King Marcus woke up before dawn. The sky outside was still dark, with just a hint of gray beginning to show on the horizon. The palace was quiet. The guards were still stationed at their posts, half asleep. The servants hadn't yet begun their morning routines. He moved quietly through the corridors to the oldest storage room in the palace, a place filled with forgotten things from decades past. Inside, covered in dust, were clothes that workers had worn long ago, maintenance uniforms, cleaning supplies, things that had been stored away and never looked at again. King Marcus searched through the piles until he found what he needed. A pair of faded blue work pants with stains on the knees, a gray shirt that had once been white but had turned dingy with age and washing, a worn-out jacket with frayed sleeves, a baseball cap that was stained and bent out of shape. He put them all on slowly, feeling strange in clothes he hadn't worn anything like since he was a young man. He looked at himself in a small, dusty mirror leaning against the wall. The man staring back at him didn't look like a king. He looked like someone who worked hard for very little money, someone who struggled to pay bills, someone people would walk past on the street without a second glance. King Marcus took a deep breath. Then he slipped out through a rarely used side exit of the palace, avoiding the main gates where guards would have questioned him. The early morning air was cool and damp. The city was just beginning to wake up. He walked slowly through the streets of Charleston, carrying a large black garbage bag and a stick with a metal hook on the end. the kind street cleaners used to pick up litter from the gutters. His heart pounded in his chest. He hadn't walked among regular people like this in over 12 years. Not since before he became king. First, no one paid any attention to him. He was invisible. Just another poor worker doing a dirty job that needed to be done. Then a young businessman in an expensive suit walked past, talking loudly on his phone about a deal he'd just closed. Without even looking, the man tossed an empty coffee cup directly onto the sidewalk right in front of King Marcus. The king bent down and picked up the cup, placing it carefully in his garbage bag. The businessman didn't even glance at him, didn't say thank you, didn't acknowledge that another human being existed in front of him. King Marcus felt a small sting in his chest. Is this how people treat those they think are beneath them? He continued walking, moving from street to street, picking up bottles, cans, scraps of paper, cigarette butts. Some people ignored him completely. Others looked at him with barely concealed disgust, as if his presence somehow offended them. Near a bus stop, a woman wearing heavy makeup and expensive jewelry was waiting. When she saw King Marcus approaching with his garbage bag, she immediately stepped several feet away, wrinkling her nose in disgust. "Stay over there with that filthy bag," she said sharply, her voice full of contempt. "You people always smell like trash." King Marcus said nothing. He simply moved to the other side of the street and continued his work. But inside his heart was taking careful notes. This woman with all her gold and perfume and designer clothes had no kindness whatsoever in her soul. He walked for hours, moving through different neighborhoods. In the wealthy areas, people shooed him away from their shop fronts, saying his presence was bad for business. In the middle-class areas, people simply ignored him, acting as if he didn't exist. A group of teenagers on their way to school laughed and pointed at him, making jokes about the old trash man who probably smelled worse than the garbage he collected. By midday, King Marcus was tired. His back ached from bending over. His hands were dirty, despite the old gloves he wore. His feet hurt from walking on hard pavement, but he kept going. He hadn't yet found what he was searching for. Then, as he turned onto a quieter residential street lined with small, modest apartment buildings, he saw her. A young black woman was sweeping the front steps of a building that looked like it had seen better days. The paint was peeling. The railings were rusted. The windows were cracked in places. But the steps were clean, and someone had planted flowers and old coffee cans along the walkway, trying to bring a little beauty to the poverty. The woman herself wore simple clothes that had been washed so many times the colors had faded. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She moved slowly, carefully, like someone who was exhausted but determined to finish the work anyway. As King Marcus walked closer, he saw a small girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, run out of the building. The girl was holding a doll, but one of the arms was missing, and the dress was torn and stained. "Mama," the girl said, her voice full of disappointment. "Can you fix Jasmine?" The young woman stopped sweeping and knelt down to her daughter's level. She took the doll gently in her hands and examined it carefully. Her face was tender, patient. "Oh, sweetheart," she said softly, "I think Jasmine is hurt pretty badly, but I'll try to fix her tonight after you go to bed. Okay? If I can't fix her, I promise that when I get paid next week, we'll try to find you another doll. I promise." The little girl's face fell, but she nodded bravely. "Okay, Mama. Thank you." King Marcus stood there watching this small moment. There was something about the way this woman spoke to her child, something genuine and loving, no impatience, no anger about a broken toy, just pure patient love. The woman stood up and noticed King Marcus standing there on the sidewalk. For a moment their eyes met. She didn't look disgusted like the woman at the bus stop. She didn't look afraid or suspicious. She just looked tired, like someone carrying heavy burdens. "Good morning," she said politely, her voice soft. "Good morning, ma'am," King Marcus replied, keeping his voice rough and low, trying to sound like a man who'd spent years working outside in all kinds of weather. The woman glanced at his garbage bag and the collection stick in his hand. "You've been working since early this morning, I suppose?" He nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Long day already." She disappeared into the building for a moment. King Marcus stood there wondering what she was doing. Then she came back carrying a plastic bottle of water. It wasn't cold. It wasn't fancy. But it was clean and full. "Here," she said, holding it out to him with both hands. "Almost like an offering. You must be very thirsty. Please take this." King Marcus was stunned. He stared at the bottle, then at her face. She wasn't doing this because anyone was watching. There were no cameras, no audience, no one to impress. Just a simple act of kindness from someone who probably had very little to give. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion he had to hide. "Thank you very much, ma'am. God bless you." She smiled, a small, tired smile. "It's nothing. We all need help sometimes. God bless you too, sir." Before he could say anything more, a harsh voice cut through the air from inside the building. "Maya, what are you doing out there? Are you wasting our water on some street beggar?" A large woman with a hard, angry face appeared in the doorway. Her arms were crossed over her chest. Her eyes were sharp and mean. "Mama Sharon, he looked thirsty," Maya said quietly, her head lowering slightly. "It's just a little water." "Just a little water?" the older woman snapped. "We barely have enough for ourselves, and you're giving it away to strangers who don't even matter. Do you think water is free? Do you think we're rich?" King Marcus saw shame wash over Maya's face. But she didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She just nodded quietly. "I'm sorry, Mama Sharon." The older woman, clearly Maya's mother-in-law, glared at King Marcus with pure hatred. "You move along. Don't stand in front of this building. You make the whole street look dirty and poor." King Marcus bowed his head slightly, still playing his role. "I'm going, ma'am." "Thank you again," he said to Maya. But as he walked away slowly, he looked back one more time. Maya was standing there with her head down, broom in hand, while her mother-in-law continued to scold her loudly. The little girl, holding her broken doll, looked sad and confused. King Marcus's heart was deeply stirred. This woman, Maya, had almost nothing. She was clearly being treated harshly in her own home. She was poor and struggling. Yet she still found it in her heart to give water to a stranger she thought was beneath her in every way. He walked further down the street, but his mind stayed fixed on that small building with peeling paint. He needed to know more. He needed to see if this kindness was real or just a moment of weakness. He needed to test her heart. Over the next 3 days, King Marcus returned to that same street. He wore the same clothes, carried the same garbage bag, walked the same route at the same times, and each time he watched carefully. On the second day, he saw Maya washing clothes by hand in a large plastic basin outside the building. Her hands were red and raw from the harsh soap. Her back was bent from the work. Her daughter sat beside her on an overturned crate, trying to do her homework on a piece of cardboard balanced on her knees. When the girl struggled with a math problem, Maya stopped washing and moved closer to her. Her voice was patient and gentle as she helped her understand. Even though she looked completely exhausted, even though her own hands were pruned and sore from hours of scrubbing. A neighbor walking past stopped to gossip with another woman on the street, and King Marcus, pretending to pick up trash nearby, heard every word clearly. Poor Maya, the first neighbor said, shaking her head. Her husband left her 2 years ago. Just disappeared one day. Never sent a dime. Never called. Left her with nothing but debt and that child. The second neighbor nodded. And that wicked mother-in-law. She controls everything in that apartment. Maya works 3 cleaning jobs just to keep a roof over their heads. And Mama Sharon takes most of the money. Says Maya owes her for letting them stay there. The poor girl barely gets to keep anything for herself or her daughter. King Marcus's jaw tightened. So she was trapped, suffering. Yet she still smiled, still gave. On the 3rd day, King Marcus decided to test her heart more directly. He walked up to the building, deliberately stumbling a little. He dropped his garbage bag and sat down heavily on the curb, breathing hard, pretending to be